everyone. Thank you all for attending this vigil. We appreciate you taking time out of your morning to support the Black Lives Matter movement.
As some of you may know or may not know, John Lewis, a civil rights activist, passed away yesterday.
Mr. Lewis led demonstrations against racially segregated restrooms, hotels, restaurants, public parks, and swimming pools, and he rose up against other indignities of second-class citizenship. At nearly every turn, he was beaten, spat upon, or burned with cigarettes. He was tormented by white mobs and absorbed body blows from law enforcement.
On March 7, 1965, he led one of the most famous marches in American history. In vanguard of 600 people demanding the voting rights they have denied, Mr. Lewis marched part ways across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, into a waiting phalanx of state troops in riot gear. We would first like to start this vigil by inviting 4 members of our community: Elizabeth Hayes Patterson, class of '63, Maya Phillips, class of 2017, and Christy Lewis, class of '20, and Victoria Baker, class of 2010, to speak about what is currently happening in our world today and how it has made an impact on their lives. Just a quick reminder, this is being recorded, and if you'd like, you can turn your cameras off, and please keep off your mic. Thank you.
Did you want people to speak in the order in which you mentioned them?
Yes, please.
My name is Elizabeth Hayes Patterson, class of 1963. Good morning to everyone. And I want to thank Lindsay and Sydney for inviting me to join in this prayer vigil today, and Maria for conveying their invitation. I'm so glad that you began by acknowledging the passing of John Lewis. He was from my generation, and he was an icon. And as you mentioned, he suffered many things as a freedom rider, as one who sat in to integrate lunch counters, and as one who fought for the right to vote. He had an interview last month, and during that interview, he was asked about the Black Lives Matter movement and demonstrations. And what he said was he was moved by those demonstrations. Sorry. And he saw them as being quite different from the ones in the civil rights movement because they were massive and inclusive. He also felt that this movement differed significantly from the movement of the 1960s, and I agree with him. For the first time in my life, and I turned 75 years old last month, I feel that this country is poised to live up to its most important foundational document in my mind, and that is the Declaration of Independence. You know, that document that said that all men, will leave the men aside, all men are created equal, all endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The first one is life. So how much of a perversion was there when Derek Chauvin pressed his knee to the neck of George Floyd for 8.5 minutes, smirking while the life drained from this man's body, audibly drained from his body? He is a police officer. He represents the government. The government is supposed to defend and protect those inalienable rights. The perversion that existed in May of this year was a perversion as well that existed at the very time the words were written. We have to acknowledge that the one person with whom those words are most associated, Thomas Jefferson, had the audacity to believe, and in fact did, own people, men, women, children, sold and bought men, women, and children. Before the ink was dry, the lie was in existence. And we have to acknowledge that. And yet, the document is important. The document is important because almost 200 years later, Dr. King could say, all I want is for America to be true to what she put on paper. And what she put on paper started with the Declaration of Independence and included the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution, the Civil War amendments, And so the question is, are we going to, in fact, live up to those documents? As I said, the document is important. And when I was at Fonfon, so when I was at the age of Sydney and Lindsay and others, I really believed that this country could be a beacon for the world. I grew up on a street in Boston where our neighbors to the left were Russian, neighbors to the right were Irish, across the street, Chinese, up the alley, Italian. I believe this is a country where people from all over the world live under the same laws. And we can show the world in one nation how all nations can live. I believe that naively. But at the same time, in those years from 1959 to 1963, and certainly after my graduation, I could not deny the fact that the reality was contrary to what we hoped for as a country. And indeed, Representative Lewis and others who were demonstrating for the right of Black people to vote throughout the country, but particularly in the South, suffered, as both Lindsay and Sydney mentioned. Representative Lewis was beaten brutally, publicly, many times, simply for seeking to have this country live up to its own promise. And he, between the years of 1960 and 1966, he was arrested 40 times. But he believed, before he died, that we were in fact on the path to changing that history. But changing that history has to result from an acknowledgement of what it in fact was. And I was so pleased to read the remarks of Samantha Lucian, the rising senior, from last month's Vigil, where she said we have to start by educating ourselves as to our history and educating ourselves as to what is happening today. And so with that, I would also say that I believe the struggle is going to be hard, because if you ask the question, what underlie the institution of slavery, the years of Jim Crow segregation, the disparate effects on Black people in particular and people of color in this country of racism, it is a system that seeks to preserve white privilege and white supremacy. You have to acknowledge that. And what I see as encouraging is I believe that many of the young people who have been in the streets, and you realize that George Floyd was killed on May 25th of this year. And weeks following that, between 15 and 26 million Americans have taken to the streets to argue for an end to systemic racism. And there have been demonstrations all over the world for the same thing. That is encouraging. But we have to realize that we are now at 2020. 400 years ago, slavery was in this country. It's going to take a long time to overcome centuries of a belief in white supremacy and white privilege, which underlies the racism that we're seeing manifest today. But I do believe that there is a willingness to do that and a recognition of the fact that this country has so much promise that can be fulfilled if we keep our eyes on the prize. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson, for speaking. Now, Maya Phillips, class of 2019, will speak.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Maya Phillips, and I graduated from Fontbonne last year with the class of 2019. I'm so pleased to share a reflection with a community that regularly seeks to combat injustice and amplify the voices of their students. Just like many of you all, these past months have been overwhelming and exhausting, to say the least. This has not only been a season of fatal and pervasive illness, but for many, also a season of revelation, education, and self-evaluation. I plan on spending the few minutes I have discussing my feelings surrounding the reality of injustice and inequity in the US. But if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm running out of words to say. The magnitude of structural oppression in the US and abroad is a topic that has really been weighing on me this summer. When I think of the concept of enslavement, when I see thousands of Black kids my age living a drastically different life than I, and when I think of how many Black people had to get murdered on camera just for this country to concur that our lives mattered, I become frustrated and disheartened. So many people over the course of centuries have dedicated their lives for the liberation of the Black body. Yet here I am, a descendant of those same people, still fighting for the same cause. When I expressed this borderline hopelessness to an older mentor of mine, she quickly reminded me that at the age of 19, I am way too young to abandon the mantle that Black Americans have been carrying since the start of this country. Though it should not be the responsibility of the oppressed to undo their own oppression, I've seen the urgency now more than ever to be a participant of this change rather than a spectator, and to refuse to lose hope. In reflecting on these 6 weeks, I've come to see that maybe it's for the best that I'm running out of words to say. Listening to many peers of mine open up and share thoughts and experiences foreign to me has shown me that even in my position, I can offer more listening to the sentiments of my peers, the historic struggles of my people, and the thoughts and solutions of revolutionaries who came before me. I am convinced that these feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, and just not knowing what to say are not unique to me. If you have been feeling the same, I want to send you encouragement and comfort in the fact that it is not just you. However, I really want to urge you, Black or non-Black, to read one of the many books about the African diaspora or the reality of structural racism in the US. I myself am a member of the NAACP and anticipate on reading and volunteering a lot more often to do my part for the community. You too must do your part and prioritize the cultivation of your mind and your sense of self before stressing over the blind and bigoted. Though these may be trying times, the effort to dismantle racism is a marathon, not a sprint. And as the late rapper Nipsey Hussle says, the marathon continues. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Now, Christy Lewis, class of 2020, will speak.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Christy Lewis, and I'm a recent graduate from the class of 2020. So this is in the memory of Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Philando Castile, Trayvon Martin, Ora Rosser, Stephon Clark, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Dominique Remy Fells, Brayla Stone, Sandra Bland, and the countless other Black men and women who the system has failed. It was a day like any other, and as I usually do, I woke up first thing in the morning and immediately opened the Instagram app to check the latest news notifications. As I am scrolling aimlessly through my feed, I stumble across a video posted by Patrisse Cullors, one of the 3 women behind the creation of the Black Lives Matter movement. Before clicking the video, a warning symbol appeared on the screen, informing me that what I was about to see would be graphic. Thinking nothing of it, I clicked on the video. What I was about to see would change my life forever. The first words that echoed through my screen was the voice of a man screaming, "Mama." For the next few minutes, I would watch what would be a portion of an 8-minute and 46-second long execution. I would watch as a person who society has told me was supposed to be there to protect me at all costs take the breath away of yet another Black person in America. I would be lying if I told you that I did not spend the next few hours unable to move in my bed in tears. But yet, amidst the pain that I was feeling from what I just watched, I never for one moment found myself surprised or shocked at the image of George Floyd's life being taken away from him. In the following days, I would hear what I considered to be offensive phrases from non-people of color, such as, "How could this happen? I didn't know it was that bad. I am so surprised that this is still happening in the United States." I found these questions to be offensive, not because they were malintentioned, but to be surprised that the killing of George Floyd could have taken place is an admittance that you have been ignoring the suffering cries from the Black community, as hundreds of mothers were forced to bury their sons and daughters for far too long at the hands of police brutality. These questions and phrases are merely proof that as Black people have been pleading for justice, the rest of the world chose to turn a blind eye. The weeks following George Floyd's murder would be filled with sleepless nights and hours spent reflecting on what it meant to be Black in America. But as the name George Floyd was chanted from every rooftop, there was a silent whispering of another name, the name of a beautiful young woman who lost her life as she was doing what we all do, sleeping, Breonna Taylor. To this day, I am unable to articulate the feelings of rage and sadness that overtake my body whenever I hear Breonna Taylor's story. Yet again, we fail to protect the women that have given everything to this country, the Black women. As I attempted to reckon with how society justified the murder of an innocent person as she was sleeping, I was reminded of a quote from Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston: "The Negro woman is the mule of the world." Black women, despite being at the forefront of every civil rights, voting, and pride movement in this country, are often erased and forgotten. Time and time again, the system that was supposedly built to protect and serve all has worked tirelessly to exclude and take the life away of Black women. As I'm writing this today, Breonna Taylor's murderers continue to live their lives freely. And if that is not a prime example of the oppression facing Black women today, then I don't know what is. I've been asked the question a lot, how are you doing? Honestly, I've been asked the question less and less each day. I've decided to stop saying that as a Black woman living in the United States that I am okay, because the truth is, I am not. Each day is spent wondering if I am next, or if my brother or dad will come home. But despite my fears, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that America and each and every one of us will take a long, hard look at ourselves and not only examine how we've contributed to over 4 centuries of systematic racism and oppression, but also challenge ourselves to fight against every racist system and ideology in this country. As a society, we are living through a national reckoning of race as coronavirus disproportionately affects the Black community, and as our Black brothers and sisters lose their lives at the hands of police. This moment that we are living through right now is without a doubt a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity given to each and every one of us to take an action and lead the anti-racism movement. I beg each and every one of you to no longer turn a blind eye to the injustice affecting those around you, but rather to use the gift that you have been given to fight tirelessly for the end of racial oppression. With that, I want to end with a quote from the late civil rights activist and icon, John Lewis. "History will not be kind to you, so you have a moral obligation, a mission, a mandate to speak up, speak out, and get in good trouble. You can do it, you must do it, not just for yourselves, but for the generations yet unborn." Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. And now, last but not least, please we ask Victoria Baker, class of 2010, to share her story.
Thank you, Lindsay. As Lindsay mentioned, my name is Victoria Baker, and I am a 2010 graduate of Fontbonne, at which we used to call FBA. Today's visual really saddens my heart immensely. But I am extremely happy that Fontbonne is putting this out and speaking about it, and it's all in our faces. I feel as though 10 years ago, when I was in high school, things were not as bad. Of course, that could be due to an upgrade in technology and a boost of social media, because there's a lot of social media out there right now. And now it's in our faces. It can't be hidden. It cannot be ignored. And it's just right there for us to see and look at, no matter how difficult those videos may be. The things happening in our world today is despicable, to say the least, and it hurts. I'm happy that it's now at the center of our attention, and it's about time. It's a little late, but it's about time. In pre-K to about 8th grade, I was probably 1 in 5 Black students in the entire school. I went to Catholic schools my entire life, so I was usually the only Black student. But we didn't realize it. No one really paid attention to color. It wasn't a thing that we mentioned. We were children, and nobody cared. But it's sad to say that it seems like we've gone backwards. Or it could just be that the racist people out there are now becoming more bold, and they just don't care, and they're just letting everybody know what they think. I work in a pretty large corporation that's pretty global, and it's sad to say that I am the only Black person in my department, not Black woman, but Black person. And it's sad. It's uncomfortable at times. I am proud to work for the company because they have really stepped up, and they have put a lot of communication about what's been going on. My saver screen, my screensaver is that the corporation stands with the Black Lives Movement. So I'm pretty proud that they're really stepping up and saying that they're going to start doing changes, not in 6 months, but right now. So I've been talking about these injustices for a while, especially with my family. I remember the night before going to a protest, I sat in my bedroom watching videos at 3 in the morning for about an hour, 2 hours, and I bawled my eyes out alone in my room. And something in me just ignited that night, at which I went to a protest with my mother and my little brother. And it just felt so empowering. It felt great seeing everyone standing together, Black, white, Asian, older people, younger people, everyone just standing together and just fighting and saying the words and no justice, no peace. It felt good. It went bad later that night, but it felt good being there. But the fight doesn't stop there. I've been emailing governors, I've been emailing attorneys, just reposting and doing whatever I feel that I can do as a person sitting there. And I encourage everyone to continue to do that. I encourage you to not give up. I encourage you to continue fighting, no matter how hurtful it might be. Just continue fighting, because without the fight, our voices will not be heard. I have faith that change is to come. As Elizabeth mentioned, educate yourself. Keep on fighting. When you see it dying down, keep posting, keep emailing, continue to apply pressure. I believe that we are here to fight as brothers and sisters, not as white or Black. I know that we will prevail. God is on our side and He does hear our voices. And I have faith that change is to come real soon. Thank you, Lindsay and Sydney and Maria, for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories. I know it takes a lot of courage, and we really appreciate you taking time to have this conversation with us.
We will now play the song Colors on the Ground by Trevor Jackson.
Minority, they would have got 2 hits for me because I'm African American and I'm a female. I'm here because I wanted to make a difference. But how dare you stand next to me in the same uniform and murder somebody? How dare you? You ought to be ashamed of yourself. So why don't we just keep it real? If you're that officer, then know good and well you got a God complex. You're afraid of people that don't look like you.
Mama soaked in tears and on her knees, she holds her baby as caution tapes around. She keeps on screaming, he was just 19. The man in blue said, I told him to stay down. That doesn't make it right. Shame on you, shame on you. But if we ask the ones we lost what they did so wrong, all they say is I have my hand up, my hoodie on, I'm crying, still I'm dying. I just have my hand up, my hoodie on, no gun was drawn. Still they find a way to make us colors on the ground. That's all they wanna see. Till then that's all we'll be. It's just another color on the ground. A child 4 years old in the backseat. So much red on daddy's shirt. After 5 pops ring so loud. Too young to understand what it quite means. Why is daddy no longer around? If she could ask her father what he did that was so wrong, he'd say, baby, I just had my hands up. My dreads were locked, my skin was black, so they attacked. Baby, I just had my hands up, my hoodie on, no gun was drawn. Still they find a way to make us colors on the ground. That's all they wanna see. I refuse to let her be just another color on the ground. Together we're strong. I'm sick of them painting the streets with them brown and red. Them brown and red. Watching on. To them cowardly ones, gon' turn in the back. Turn in the back. We'll always be here. You wanna know why they use this to paint the ground, man? They tried. Cause black is beautiful. And they scared. They can't get rid of us, JITW.
We would now like to share some stories involving the Black Lives Matter movement, who they were, and how they died. To some people who knew him, Michael Brown was an ordinary U.S. teenager with much to like about him. Court documents, however, portrayed him as a suspect in a convenience store robbery who assaulted the police officer who killed him. These two profiles have framed the debate around his death on August 9th, when the black 18-year-old was shot dead by a white officer during an incident on the street in Ferguson, Missouri. That shooting inflamed passions in Ferguson and across America, stirring up America's debate over race and justice. Like many teenagers, he smoked marijuana and drank alcohol. Some of the amateur rapper songs contain violent lyrics, such as, "My favorite part is when the bodies hit the ground." And then, on August 9th, he allegedly stole a pack of cigarettes from a shop, pushing the store clerk into a display case when confronted. Shortly after this incident, caught on CCTV, police officer Darren Wilson received an alert in his patrol car. Stopping Mr. Brown and his friend, Dorian Johnson, for walking in the middle of the road, the police officer grew suspicious that he had carried out the robbery. Reports vary on the exact details, but all say that there was an altercation. Mr. Wilson's gun was fired, and the pair ran. Mr. Wilson fired more shots, hitting the unarmed Mr. Brown a total of 6 times in the head and right arm. The body lay in the street for a total of 4 hours in a pool of blood before it was removed. On Monday, a grand jury ruled that they would not charge Mr. Wilson over the shooting.
Tamir Rice, 12, was alone at the Kudal Recreation Center in Cleveland on November 22, 2014, playing with a replica toy airsoft gun when a 911 dispatcher received word from a caller that a male was in the park randomly pointing a gun at people. While the 911 caller told the dispatcher the gun was probably fake, the detail was never relayed to the 2 police officers who responded to the call and spotted Rice at a gazebo holding what they say they thought was a real gun. Within 2 seconds after arriving on the scene, one of the officers, Timmy Lutherman, opened fire twice, hitting the boy once in the torso. He died a day later in a hospital. The episode was captured on surveillance video. The case against Lutherman and his partner, Frank Garmbach, was presented to a grand jury on September 28, 2015. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Timothy McGinty announced that the grand jury decided not to indict the officers. In May 2017, Lohaman was terminated from the Cleveland Police Department for submitting inaccurate details on his job application and other administrative policy violations.
Breonna Taylor, age 26, a licensed EMT, was shot to death in her own apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, when 3 white police officers executed a no-knock warrant on March 13th. The 3 plainclothes police officers rammed down the door and were alleged to have a blindly opened fire in Taylor's apartment, according to the wrongful death lawsuit filed in April by Taylor's mother. Taylor was shot at least 8 times and died. Taylor was accused of accepting UPS packages for an ex-boyfriend who police were investigating as an alleged drug trafficker and used her address according to the warrant. The police said they knocked several times before they used a ram to open the door and were allegedly met with gunfire from Taylor's new boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, authorities said. Walker said he called 911 before firing 1 shot from his licensed firearm, striking one of the officers in the leg. The 3 officers, including the involved in the episode, were placed on administrative reassignment pending an investigation and are named as defendants in the lawsuit filed by Taylor's mother. The FBI announced on May 22nd that it is an open investigation into the police involving shooting death.
We would now like to invite you all to share some of your own personal stories. Please use the hand-raising feature on Zoom until we ask you to unmute.
In order to utilize the raise hand feature, at the bottom of your screen, click Participants, and there you should see 3 buttons. Click the one that says Raise Hand, and then wait until we call your name and unmute you. And if you can't find that feature, you can also raise your hand like on this camera, and then I can call on you.
Hi, I'm Sister Betsy, and I'm speaking not because I want to, but because I have promised myself that I will keep at this, doing everything I can to be part of the solution. I'm so moved hearing your stories, and I'm not surprised because I've been paying attention, and yet at the same time, I feel like I have a new set of eyes in the last 6 weeks. But I guess what I want to say is that I am sorry. I'm so sorry that I'm listening and that I'm committed. I'm committed to changing myself. I'm committed to really paying attention to white supremacy, and that's the only phrase that describes it. And that I'm committed to like speaking up every time I can to say what I'm saying is that I'm listening, I'm sorry, and I'm committed to being part of the change. And also because this hasn't been named, but for me, it's the driving force. And that is that in God's eyes, we're all equal, precious, beautiful, worthy of life, liberty, and happiness. And I believe that God weeps when that doesn't happen. And so I'm committed to it for that reason as well, that I'm here to be God's love and justice. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you, Sister Betsy.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can hear me. This is Yolanda Kiner. I am Sydney London's mom. Just wanted to share with you a couple stories. The first story I remember when I was a junior in high school. My dad and my mom had come home one night and they decided to stop off at a bar. At the time, I lived in Michigan City, Indiana. It's a very small town. My entire family resided there. My dad went inside this bar that had a little package store to get beer to bring home, and my dad never came out. About 10 minutes later, my mom thought my dad was just in there maybe talking, and when she found him, he was on the floor, and some white supremacists were in the bar, and they had beat my dad to the point where his ear was almost detached. The next day, the bar burned down. They never knew who burned the bar down. People were upset in the town what had happened. My dad never spoke about that night. He never spoke ill about those people. And that was one thing that amazed me about my parents. They lived through the civil rights movement. They lived in the South, migrated to the North, and raised 8 kids. They faced racism head on, and never spoke a negative word. And that just came back to me when all of this started playing out. And I mentioned it to my brothers and sisters, and they didn't forget about it, but they had just decided not to talk about it. That kind of stayed with me throughout my entire life. You give people the benefit of the doubt. Not everybody's racist. They're good and bad people, and that's how we were raised. When Sydney was 11 months old, I lived in Attleboro, Massachusetts. The police came to my door. Sydney's dad was gathering a few of his things. The police took one look at me and saw that I was a Black woman. They decided that I had no right to be in that home. They decided that night that I was disturbing their peace in my own home. They took Sydney away from me. Hello?
We can hear you now.
I think this froze. So
Oh,
I'm not sure how much you heard.
we stopped at the part where it said they took Sydney away from you.
They took Sydney away from me and filed a false report, stated that I was abusing my child. Weeks later, not knowing what to do, I met this gentleman who was an attorney, and this was around the time of the Democratic National and at the time I was in the medical profession, and he stated that he had been beaten up by police officers in Brookline, and they had fractured his eye. And he said that he was going to call the Civil Rights Committee's Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and file a complaint. Soon after I took care of this patient, that's exactly what I did. I called these individuals, told them what happened in Attleboro. And this one particular attorney, civil rights attorney, stated, "Oh, they're doing it again." I thought they would have learned by now. 4 years it took, but we finally saw justice. We won. This police officer, after he was investigated, was found to be discriminatory towards women, towards children, towards people of color, and he was ultimately fired and removed from the force. And since that day, I have vowed to fight for people's civil rights. So I went back to school, got my law degree, and that's exactly what I do. So I am so proud of Sydney and Lindsay. Thank you, Ms. Sarte, for having this space for people to share their stories, for people to learn, for people to grow, and for people to continue this fight. It's very important work. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Carol and Scott, you can speak.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that I was deeply moved by your presentations and by all the speakers. And I want to say that for me, the battle against racism has been a lifelong thing. Growing up, obviously, I'm very white, but I was in an environment in the Catholic schools where it was the Italians against the Irish and the Irish against the Italians. And I was one of the Italians, and we were in the minority. We were made fun of for what we brought to lunch. We were made fun of for all kinds of different things, and it was sad. And I remember in my own home, my mother telling me that when she went to high school, at the High School of Practical Arts in Boston, she was very good friends with the Black student who was there, was one of the only Blacks. And she hugged her at graduation and cried that she was leaving her Black friend. to only have her relatives tell her that was terrible to do and how could she be like that with blacks. And she said to us as we were children, there is no difference between us. We are all God's children, and I don't ever want you to put up a wall between you and anybody. We are one. And I think that that lesson, that we are one, is something that resonated very strongly in my heart and in my soul. So as I got older, I became involved in grassroots organizing, and I would meet Black people who had suffered incredibly at the hands of this system. One of them, my friend Geraldine, told the story of how they used to go to New Orleans to visit their relatives, and they'd make the trip from Boston in terror of being stopped by the police. They would be so frightened, and sometimes when they were stopped, they were badly treated. And still they'd go because they wanted to see these relatives, and still they'd have the courage to make that trip. And then when they got to New Orleans, she said that they'd go to the Catholic Church, and there was a Catholic church for Black people and a Catholic church for white people. And to me, that was just so incredible that the church itself was segregated, that the church itself was racist. And that woman, Geraldine, was going to be our organizer, and she brought a church in Mattapan into our group. And I sat on a board as the people who were people of good faith, Black, white, people from Protestant and Catholic churches, decided that they weren't sure they could afford to pay Geraldine, so they were going to let her go. And the white organizer had used up all the salary that we'd saved to have our new Black organizer, so she had to go. And the sadness of that still resonates in my soul. But as I look at what's going on now in this long battle, and I too was in corporate America, so I can sympathize. I've seen Black friends leave the company who never should have been in a position where they felt they were unwelcome, where they felt there was no career path, because they were really brilliant people who deserved the right to be in that company. And that company could have benefited from their talents and instead lost them. And that is heartbreaking for me. And it was heartbreaking for me to see that discrimination carried out, not just against Blacks, but Asians, and to see all these awful things going on. But I have hope, because this time it feels different. It feels like people really do care. And all those millions in the streets, I agree, it seems more hopeful than it ever was. And I just pray that that will be the case. I pray that no other children will listen at a dinner table as their aunt says, as I heard my aunt say, Black people are okay, but I wouldn't want to eat with one. I work with them, but I'd never think of eating with one. And you sit there and go, how can this prejudice exist? This is so stupid. You know that even as a 5-year-old kid, that this doesn't sound right. Why don't people know what doesn't sound right? And to me, I think that all of us who know what sounds right have the obligation to speak. And my hope is that more and more people will speak. So one day the world will sound right. Thank you.
This is Irene Deschanais, the class of 1958, the oldest one here. I just wanted to share a story. When I was a junior at Fontbonne, I was asked to babysit for these people I knew who were spending the summer in North Carolina. I had never left Boston. So we were walking down the street about 10 minutes later, and I was holding the girl, the 4-year-old girl's hand, and she pulled away and ran over to a fountain that said for coloreds only. And the mother who was there absolutely lost it. She was screaming, how could you let this happen? And I stood there at 17 years old, and I said, this is not right. And that began my civil rights journey. And the song we used to sing was, it's a long, long road to freedom. But I had no idea it was going to be as long as it would be. I was singing We Shall Overcome with Martin Luther King on Boston Common in 1965. And we really thought something would happen. So 2 weeks ago, I was standing at a vigil in Jamaica Plain for Black Lives Matter. So it's been a long, long road to freedom. But let me tell you, this time seems different. And I am in there. I'm all in, as they say. I can't get in the middle of the things. I'm on the fringes. But my prayers and all my interest and energy is with the wonderful, wonderful graduates and students at Fontbonne. We shall overcome. With you on our side, I have great faith. Thank you for listening.
Okay, are there anyone who wants to speak before? If you don't want to share a story, you can also talk about how you feel about the movement or anything like that. Elena Carr, I think.
Thank you for doing this. I know that, I am filled with admiration for all of you, and especially for your mother, Sydney. She is amazing. But it's heartbreaking to hear the stories, and I fear that we're going to hear a lot more. I want to do everything I can right now. It is very difficult because of the COVID situation. If anybody has any ideas to share with me, I would be more than happy to take your suggestions. But thank you for doing this. It is wonderful to see the students, and it's wonderful to see the graduates. And the stories have been so touching. That is really all I can say right now. I mean, the stories are heartbreaking to hear of discrimination and cruelty. Thank you.
Thank you. Now to end this and transition into prayer, you will hear 3 tones. We would now like to end this open mic, but thank you everyone for sharing your stories. Let us begin in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we cry out and humbly ask you to heal the aches and pains in our hearts due to the current tragedy that is taking place in our community. We come together because the sadness in our hearts consumes us of the joys we once felt. Our anger has turned into tears because we can no longer hold back the frustration that the situation has brought against us. Every day, thousands and thousands of lives have been lost to the gun of a man who pulled the trigger due to the color of someone's skin. They had their hands up and their hoodies were on. Then the gun was drawn. No mother should have to bury their child, and yet here they are mourning over the loss of their dead loved one. We ask why. Why is this happening? Why do Black people have to live in a world that hates them? Why do children have to wonder if their parents will come back home? Why do people have to continue to fight for their rights when it's something that should be already given to them. This world is filled with pain and suffering. We know we sin, and we know we do things that may displease you, my Father. So we ask for your forgiveness.
My God, I'm sorry for choosing to do wrong and failing to do good. I ask you to forgive those who never intended for these things to happen, whose hearts are pure and those who only want our world to live in peace. You know our heart's desire, so help us to fulfill your word. Help us to have a clean conscience so that we can do things in accordance with your word. Help us to remember that we are imperfect and that we may fall short. Help us to put you first in every decision that I make and every challenge that I face. Forgive us for trying to figure life out on our own. Without your help, we ask you to give us your Holy Spirit so that we can be guided in the right direction. Give us strength and wisdom to endure the trials that may come our way.
It is our hope that one day we all live in peace. There will be no more outcry, nor pain or suffering. We will be able to see our dead loved ones again. Help us to choose your path, even if it may be the most challenging one. Help us to walk in your light, knowing that all is right in the world. One day, we know that we will have everlasting life, and we will rejoice in the hope of the glory of our heavenly Father. You give us nothing that we can't handle. We pray that you give us the strength to not retaliate, but instead pray for those who do not have your word and do not understand the pain that they are inflicting on millions of people. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 and 8, you tell us, keep on asking, and it will be given to you. Keep on seeking, and you will find. Keep on knocking, and it will be open to you. For everyone asking receives, and everyone seeking finds, and to everyone knocking it will be open. So we ask you, those who are searching for peace, grant it to them. Those who are knocking on your door, answer them with open arms. Remember the lives of those who were lost due to police brutality. We pray this prayer in the name of your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Lastly, we want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to join us today. Thank you.
This concludes our vigil.
God bless.
In the chat, Miss Bullport mentioned that if anyone else was wondering, advocacy and activism comes in many forms. If COVID concerns keeps you indoor, as Victoria mentioned, and reach out to government officials, letters, emails, sign petitions, donate to the cause. Many organizations need financial support to stand and fight. And also September 1st is a very important day for voting. Vote for equality and justice.
Any last words?
Our vigil is concluded, but if you do want to stay after and just talk about it, if you didn't have a chance to speak before, you are welcome to do so. Or as other people are doing, you can text it in the chat.